a previous video, I showed you how to replace the shower head, and in this video, I'm going to replace the handle. In case you're interested, here's the product information for my replacement parts. My shower already had a Delta system in it, and I thought it would be easier if I replaced it with another Delta system. I really didn't want to get into the plumbing inside of the walls, I just wanted a quick cosmetic fix. Be sure to read through your instruction manual before you start working on any project. Here are the tools that I used. For this project, you need to shut off the water to your house. There should be a lever next to a pipe. You just reach in, grab that lever, and pull until it is perpendicular with the pipe. It's going to take a bit of effort to get that lever pulled down. Then you're going to want to open up some of your faucets around the house and just let the water run until it stops, and then you'll be ready to go. Before you start working in your shower, make sure that you cover up the drain so that nothing falls down there. In order to take off the shower handle, you're going to have to access the little screw that's holding it in place. Here's a close-up of the shower handle, and I'm just sticking a pokey object into these two little notches so I can kind of pry that little cap off. It can be a little stubborn, so keep prying a little bit at a time until it pops off. Next, you need to untwist that screw so that you can get the handle off. It's a little easier if you hold the handle in place with one hand and twist the screwdriver with the other. I noticed that when I let go of the handle, it just twisted right along with the screw and I didn't make any progress. So if you hold it, it's a little easier. Then just grab that handle and pull it right off. With the handle out of the way, now you should be able to access the screws that are holding the faceplate onto the wall. Here's an up-close picture of where those two screws are located. If you have a different type of faucet than a Delta, say you have a Moen for example, your screws might be located in a different place. My faceplate was stuck to the wall, so I got my box cutter and cut through some of the caulking that was holding it in place. Once I cut through it, it came off pretty easily. The caulking left a bit of a residue on the wall, so I got my putty knife and started scraping it off. Just be careful that you don't press too hard. You don't want to scratch your tiles while you're doing this. The last thing to remove is the casing. There might also be a rubber gasket that acts as a spacer between your casing and the valve itself. It looks a bit like a hair tie. Pull that off too if you see one of those. Now we get to start putting the new faceplate and shower handle back on. Find the rubber gasket in your kit. You want to put it over the top of that large nut that's holding the cartridge in place. It's called a bonnet. So when you put your gasket on, push it over the top of the bonnet, but then pull it back forward so that it's really close to it. Then grab your casing and you just want to gently push it over the top of the cartridge and the gasket that you just put on. Remember that the gasket kind of acts as a spacer, so it kind of keeps the casing from rubbing up against the cartridge. You want to put the new faceplate on next. Just kind of slides over the casing, and you want to make sure that you line up the two holes in the faceplate with the screw holes that are inside the wall. I think this was the most difficult part of the project actually, was just making sure that everything was lined up and that the screws were getting into their anchors that are in the wall. I thought it was a little easier to see when I started screwing in the faceplate if I left it popped off the wall a little bit, just so that I could see that the screw was actually getting into the anchor that it was supposed to get into. Another tip for you that might help: once I got the first screw into place, I immediately stopped and started working on the second screw. If you screw the first screw in all the way, you're not going to be able to see where the second screw is going and if it's actually anchored into the place that it's supposed to be. So I just worked one screw at a time, but I made sure they were both in the correct place before I really started screwing them in. Now it's time to put the handle back on. First thing you're going to need to do is remove the cap. I kind of just got my fingernails underneath of it and was able to pop it off. There's a screw in there that's going to screw into the cartridge that's sticking out of the casing. You should notice when you get the handle in the correct position, it just kind of slides into place. And then it should only rotate about 90 degrees. So just make sure that where it starts and where it ends is where you want it to be. You can always kind of move it around and adjust it, and then push the cap back into place. This project is almost done. We just need to put some caulking around the faceplate. We want a really good watertight seal because water is going to be dripping down from the shower head, and you don't want any water to get into your walls. So when you put the caulking around the faceplate, you want to leave a little bit of a gap at the bottom just in case any water does happen to get into your faceplate. It has a way to get out because gravity pulls water down, and so the water would naturally collect at the bottom of this faceplate. So just leave that a little space open without any caulk on it at the very bottom. Then just take your finger and you want to smooth out the caulking. Start at the bottom, work your way up to make sure that you leave that space at the bottom open. Take some extra caulking and put it around the screws to make sure that those have a watertight seal also. Then you're going to want to grab a sponge and take off that excess caulking. It's kind of hard to see because I chose a clear caulk, but just kind of, make sure that you clean up around the edges of the faceplate, but also make sure that you clean up around the screws too. And that's it. All that's left to do is turn the water back on. Two things to keep in mind when you're doing this is that you want to make sure that you have an open faucet running somewhere in your house, and you also want to turn the water back on somewhat slowly. If you turn the water back on too fast, there is a potential that it could cause some damage to your pipes. So go slow and try out your new shower head.